It was Saturday night, and the sun had just set, creating a twilight that made it hard to decide whether to turn on the lights. Mark Evans didn't have to decide. He was pulling into his garage on a quiet street in Sharpsburg. A moment later, a slender man with dark hair emerged from a side door carrying a travel bag, a briefcase, and a laptop. Years of experience allowed him to handle the items with ease. He entered the house without calling out to his wife, Lisa, knowing she wasn't home. Mark headed to the living room, placing his briefcase and laptop on the sofa and his travel bag on the stairs. He hung his coat in the closet near the front door, then removed his jacket and tie, unbuttoning the top buttons of his shirt. Mark had just returned from a regional managers meeting at Avis Industries. Although he wasn't technically a manager, as the lead systems analyst, his supervisor, skilled at managing people but clueless about IT systems, had required him to attend the meeting in Pittsburgh. Mark had told his wife he'd be back on Monday, claiming the meeting was followed by weekend seminars. He had his reasons for this and didn't want to come home too soon. Regretting not having packed more comfortable clothes for the trip, he knew Lisa would have questioned why he hadn't. Now home, Mark took a shower and changed into jeans and a polo shirt. After a quick meal of leftovers and a bottle of beer, he read the local newspaper in the living room, appearing like a relaxed husband back from a trip. In reality, he was grappling with a personal crisis. He had worked through denial but was still dealing with anger, bargaining, and depression. Past midnight, he cleaned the kitchen, realizing it was a way of procrastinating. Unable to find another solution, he put on a light jacket and headed for the side door. Remembering something, he returned to the living room, sent an email from his laptop, and then left the house. 5 minutes later, he was in his garage. The door closed behind him as he drove away. At 7:37 p.m., the Sharpsburg emergency operator answered a call. "What's your emergency?" A youthful voice replied, "I need the police. I think a crime has been committed." "Where are you, ma'am?" the operator asked. "I'm at a payphone on Park Drive near George Washington Park," the woman answered, her voice faint due to a poor connection. "What crime has been committed?" "Were you attacked or robbed?" the operator inquired. The young woman hesitated before answering, "No, it wasn't me. I'm fine. I was running in the park, on the trail leading to the picnic areas, and I saw a car parked there. The doors were open, the lights were on, and there was a lot of blood." Now fully alert, the operator asked, "Do you need an ambulance? Are there any injured people?" "No, there was no one there. Just an empty car and blood," the caller replied, adding after a pause, "I didn't look around much. I was afraid someone might come after me, so I ran to this payphone to call you. You did the right thing. A car is on its way and should be there in less than 10 minutes. Please wait for the officers so you can show them the exact location." Alarmed, the caller responded, "No, I'm not going to wait. What if someone comes after me?" She hung up. The operator stared at the screen as the call ended. "I hope I didn't pull the officers away from something more important," she thought. Around 2 p.m. the next day, Detective Peter Nesbitt arrived at the Evans house. A blonde woman was unloading a suitcase from her car as he pulled up. Approaching quickly, he said, "Excuse me, I'm looking for Mrs. Evans." She turned, setting the suitcase down, and replied, "I'm Lisa Evans. Do I know you?" "No, ma'am. I'm Detective Peter Nesbitt with the Sharpsburg Police. We're trying to locate your husband, Mark Evans. His car was found abandoned at George Washington Park this morning. He showed his badge and ID." Lisa looked concerned but then said, "Mark is in Pittsburgh. He always leaves his car at the airport. You must be mistaken." The detective insisted, "We're certain it's his car. Both the license plate and VIN match your registration." Confused, Lisa walked toward the side door. "If it's his car, it must have been stolen from the airport. I don't know what else to tell you." Nesbitt pressed on. "When was the last time you spoke with your husband?" Can you call him now to confirm he's in Pittsburgh? Does he have a cell phone you can call? Lisa stopped, set her suitcase down, and searched her purse for her phone. He called me yesterday morning from Pittsburgh. I'll call him now. She dialed his number, but a phone rang in the detective's pocket. He answered, "Hello, Mrs. Evans." Startled, she asked, "How did you get Mark's cell phone?" Nesbitt replied, "I can't disclose that. It's evidence in a potential major crime. It was found in your husband's car." Now visibly worried, Lisa asked, "Major crime? What do you mean?" "Your husband's car was found with its doors open and a bullet hole. We need to find him to rule him out as either a victim or a suspect. Could you call his hotel in Pittsburgh?" Lisa picked up her suitcase and said, "Of course, the hotel number is in my planner. He always stays at the same one. Come inside, and we'll sort this out." In the kitchen, she quickly found the number and called the hotel. After hanging up, she turned to the detective. "Mark's suitcase and laptop are in the living room." "I don't understand." The detective, looking thoughtful, called his colleague. "Hi, Dave, I need a search warrant for the Evans house. We need to determine if Mr. Evans is a victim or a suspect. Bring it here as soon as possible. I'll be waiting." He hung up and sat down across from Lisa. "A search warrant? You can search anything you want, just ask." "I want you to find my husband," Lisa said. Detective Nesbitt replied, "I have to follow protocol. If your husband is involved in anything illegal, any evidence found without a warrant can't be used in court." Lisa, angered, said, "Illegal? Mark isn't involved in anything illegal. He works with computers." Nesbitt asked, "Then why did he come home without telling you?" Lisa went pale and whispered, "Oh no, that can't be." Distressed, she said, "I have no idea why he came home early. All I know is that he isn't involved in anything illegal." Her panic grew. "Mark could be hurt somewhere, you have to find him." Detective Nesbitt spoke more gently. "We don't know anything for sure yet, Mrs. Evans. I need to do things properly. All of our officers are looking for your husband. Why don't you make some coffee while we wait for the warrant?" His empathetic tone calmed Lisa, and she began making coffee. However, she tensed again when he said, "While we're having coffee, could you tell me how you've spent the last 48 hours? We need statements from everyone involved." Nesbitt waited a few minutes before asking for a preliminary statement. They sat at the kitchen table, drinking coffee as he described the state of Mark's car, including the bullet hole and the blood. He mentioned that the blood suggested a second shot hit the body, which had been lying on firewood near the car, and that the bullet was being examined. The car had been towed for a detailed inspection, and the forensic and medical examiners were still working at the scene. Detective David, Nesbitt's colleague, arrived with the search warrant, and 2 forensic technicians began a thorough search of the Evans house, garage, and car. Nesbitt agreed with Lisa to collect Mark's razor and toothbrush for DNA comparison. Lisa was so distressed that Nesbitt asked her to stay on the sofa while they finished the search. After an hour, they decided to take only Mark's suitcase, laptop, and DNA samples. The laptop was password protected. "Mrs. Evans, do you know your husband's laptop password?" Nesbitt asked. Eager to help, Lisa replied, "It used to be his name and birth year, Mark 1971. It should work." None of the variations worked. Nesbitt reassured her, "Our technicians will find a way to bypass it." The items were stored in the forensic van. Nesbitt sat down with Lisa to take her statement. "Now, Mrs. Evans, I need basic information about your whereabouts this weekend. Let's start with Saturday morning." Lisa took a deep breath. "On Saturday morning, I did household chores. Mark called me from Pittsburgh around 1 or 1:30, apologizing for not being home. I went shopping until about 4:30, then came back home. After dinner, around 7:30, I went to a friend's house and spent the night there. This morning, I woke up late, took my time, and got home around 2. As she explained, Lisa grew tense, staring at the floor and clenching her fists. Detective Nesbit finished writing, closed his notebook, and said, "We may need more details later, Mrs. Evans. This is enough for now, but be ready to provide more if necessary." He put away his notebook and pen, then joined the others searching the garage and car. Before leaving, he asked, "Do you have any recent full-body photos of your husband? A good headshot would also help. All we have is his driver's license photo." He walked over to the fireplace, glancing at the wedding photos. Lisa quickly brought out a photo album. "Here are some recent pictures, Detective. Take whichever you need." They sat together, and Nesbit selected a group photo and one of Mark. "These will be perfect," he said. Lisa handed him the photos, and he asked, "Is the man in this photo a relative? If we need a DNA sample, a family member could help if we can't use the razor or toothbrush." Lisa replied, "No, that's Black Emer, Mark's best friend since elementary school. Mark doesn't have any close relatives." Nesbit thanked her and joined the others in the garage. Lisa, on the verge of tears, remained at the kitchen table. Nesbit felt sympathy for her. Her husband was missing and possibly involved in a serious incident. The fact that she didn't know he was in town added to the mystery. The detectives and forensic experts finished searching the garage and car, finding blood stains on the gas and brake pedals of Lisa's car. This discovery led them to tow the car for a more detailed inspection. As the technicians packed up, the detectives discussed the case. Nesbit, looking toward the side door, said to his colleague, "What's your opinion of Mrs. Evans?" "I'm unsure," his colleague replied, "especially with the blood in her car. She seemed like a concerned wife, but it's hard to say." "We shouldn't jump to conclusions," Nesbit decided. "Let's see her reaction when we tell her about the blood and towing her car." They called Lisa and entered the kitchen, surprising her as she was on her cell phone. She quickly ended the call. "You're back. I thought you were done," Nesbit said. "We found blood stains on the pedals of your car. We're towing it for a detailed inspection. I hope you don't mind." Lisa looked stunned. "Blood in my car?" "I didn't see any blood," Nesbit responded. "We'll need to determine how it got there and if it's related to the incident in the park. We'll also need the shoes you wore today." "I haven't been to the park in weeks," Lisa said, visibly shaken. "I don't understand how there could be blood in my car." She handed over her shoes, then collapsed into a chair, covering her face and sobbing. Both detectives realized they needed more information and left, leaving Lisa slumped in the kitchen chair. "What do you think, Dave? Concerned wife or good actress? Did you notice how quickly she ended her call?" Nesbit asked. David Klein shook his head. "I don't know. She seems sincere, but if the blood in her car is her husband's, she could be involved. We should talk to her friends and neighbors, maybe someone knows something. She was probably talking to her best friend." "Yes, following that lead could help. I also want to know why he came back early. That could be the key," Nesbit said. The detective bagged the shoes as evidence. Since they had arrived separately, they returned to the station alone, each trying to make sense of the clues. They spent the rest of their shift writing reports. The next morning, Peter and Dave arrived early, eager to dive into the case. They were greeted with forensic and medical examiner reports, which took them an hour to review. Peter observed, "The reports point in the same direction, but we shouldn't rush things. Let's see what else we can find on his computer. Meanwhile, we should talk to his lawyer and co-workers." David agreed, and they visited Mark's lawyer, Robert Graham, who quickly made time for them. "I can't discuss my client's legal situation." "What do you need?" he asked. Detective Nesbit replied, "We need confirmation of these emails sent to you from Mark Evans' computer. We want to ensure they weren't just drafts." He handed over 4 pages. The lawyer confirmed, "These are originals. I can verify their receipt." The detectives thanked him and headed back to their car, exchanging knowing smiles. On their way to ABC Industries, Peter remarked, "As you mentioned, the spouse is often involved. We've got more work to do at Mark's workplace." They were taken to Mark's supervisor's office. Detective Klein took the lead. "We're investigating the discovery of Mark Evans' car in George Washington Park. Perhaps you've read about it. We have some questions." Mark's boss assured them of his cooperation. "Mark is a valuable employee. What do you need to know?" First, Mark was supposed to stay in Pittsburgh until Friday night. He mentioned seminars on Saturday and Sunday. "Can you confirm his schedule?" Klein asked. The supervisor quickly replied, "Mark didn't have any events scheduled for the weekend. I expected him back Friday night." Detective Klein noted this and continued, "Have you noticed anything unusual about Mark lately? Anything that concerned you?" The boss thought for a moment before responding. "Mark seemed preoccupied recently. I asked if he was having any problems, but he said everything was fine. He's been very thoughtful. I assumed he was just working hard." The detectives thanked him and returned to their car, feeling they were making progress. By mid-morning, they were back at the office and received preliminary DNA results and a forensic report, which included a strange box with wires. With more pieces of the puzzle in place, they reviewed their notes in an interrogation room, confident they had a better understanding. They decided to visit Lisa Evans again, arriving at her house around 3 p.m. without calling ahead to catch her off guard. Lisa appeared startled when she saw them. "Detectives, have you found my husband? I've been calling the sergeant every 2 hours, and there's nothing new to report." Detective Nesbitt replied, "No, but we've made progress. We'd like to ask you a few questions." Lisa, looking embarrassed, said, "Of course. Come in. I'll do my best to help." I in the living room, Nesbitt sat across from her while Klein opened his notebook. "Is there anything you want to tell us about your relationship with Black?" he asked. Lisa went pale. "What? Black is my husband's best friend. He's just my friend." Detective Nesbitt calmly asked, "Are you having an affair with Black Emer?" Lisa, even paler, stammered, "Absolutely not. How can you ask me that?" The detective stood. Klein said, "We need you to come to the station for a formal statement." Lisa panicked. "What? Am I under arrest? Why do I have to go to the station?" "You're not under arrest, but we need an official statement. You can bring a lawyer if you want." Lisa quickly replied, "I don't need a lawyer. I'll go to the station and do whatever it takes to help find Mark." Lisa led the detectives to her car. Once at the station, they escorted her to a dimly lit interrogation room designed to create a negative atmosphere. "We'll ask you to wait here while we gather our documents. Are you sure you don't want a lawyer?" Detective Nesbitt gave her another chance to decide. Lisa shook her head, her blue eyes filled with tears. The detective left the room, ensuring the cameras were recording. Detective Klein told his superior officer, "I want a clear recording of everything said. I think we're about to solve this case." Peter Nesbitt approached with files. "Let's grab some coffee first. Give her a bit of time to reflect." The three men agreed and spent 20 minutes in the cafeteria, discussing the case and planning the interrogation. Meanwhile, across town, a volunteer at Crime Stoppers answered a call. "Good morning, this is Crime Stoppers. We pay up to $1,000 for tips that help solve crimes. This call is being recorded." After a few seconds of silence, an older man spoke, "Can I get the money if I help the police?" "It depends on your tip and how it helps the police. Do you have information about a crime?" There was another pause before the caller asked, "Do I get the money immediately? What if the police trick me?" "The money isn't from the police, so they won't cheat you. Tell me what you know, and I'll give you a code number. You can call back in a few days to check if your tip helped." The man sounded frustrated. "I need the money now. I need juice." If you need food, I can direct you to shelters, the volunteer replied. Not food. Juice. The kind that costs $5 a bottle. The volunteer smiled but continued professionally. If your tip is good, you could buy plenty of juice. Okay, I'll wait, the caller said. I saw someone throw a gun into the river under 3rd Street Bridge. It was Sunday morning. He had a rifle and 2 shovels. The volunteer asked, was this on the east side of the bridge? Did he throw it into the water? Yes, he just threw it off the dock, the man confirmed. Can you describe him? He was tall, blonde, and driving a dark blue car. The license plate started with SS, but I don't remember the rest. The volunteer noted the information and said, I have everything we need. Your code is 127. Call back in a few days, and we'll let you know if your tip helped the police. The volunteer passed the information to the police liaison. A diver was sent out within an hour and quickly recovered the items. The gun was taken to the forensic lab, where it was linked to a recent crime scene in George Washington Park. A report was sent to the detectives, and a technician retrieved the 2 shovels from the property office. As the detectives left the cafeteria, they were greeted by an employee delivering ballistic and Crime Stoppers reports. Detectives, we have the weapon used in the George Washington Park shooting. The attached report could lead us to the perpetrator. The employee handed over the reports. Klein and Nesbitt reviewed them, then called vehicle records on a computer. Pete, I'll interrogate our guest in the interview room while you get a uniformed officer to bring in Mr. Moore for questioning. Sounds like a plan, Dave. Things are coming together, Nesbitt replied. Detective Klein gathered the reports and entered the interrogation room where Lisa Evans was waiting. Meanwhile, his partner arranged for a uniformed officer to visit Blackmore's home. Soon, they would be on their way. In the interrogation room, Lisa sat calmly, showing no fear or sadness. Sorry to keep you waiting, Mrs. Evans. This room is monitored and recorded, Detective Klein said. I don't mind. I have nothing to hide, she replied. Good. Let's begin. Are you having an affair with Blackmore? Yes or no? Lisa's shoulders slumped, and she looked away. Yes, she whispered. Klein laid out documents from Mark's laptop. We have proof of your affair. Your husband knew. He sent this to his lawyer, planning a divorce on grounds of infidelity. This map shows your visits to Moore's house. Lisa looked shocked. How did Mark find out? Klein held up a small device. He installed this tracker in your car, monitoring your location in real time. She stared at the device. Mark knew for weeks. And he wanted a divorce. She began to cry. Klein continued, Mark documented your interactions with Moore. The last map shows his location on Saturday night when he disappeared. He emailed his lawyer saying he planned to confront you and feared he might be arrested. Lisa protested, but Mark never showed up at Black's house. I stayed there all night. Klein responded, preliminary DNA results show the blood in the park is Mark's. We also found the weapon used, linked to your lover. The question is, how long will you cover for him? Lisa insisted, Black didn't do anything to Mark. We were together all night. Klein added, we also found your husband's blood in your car and on your shoes. My partner is picking up Mr. Moore now. Whoever tells us what happened and where to find Mark's body will get a better deal. Lisa fell silent, visibly shaken. Klein handed her the blood evidence reports, but she barely glanced at them. Mark can't be dead. I love him. I need him, she sobbed, clutching at damp, crumpled tissue. Detective Klein gave her a few minutes to compose herself. When she seemed calmer, he said, there's no doubt your husband is dead. The medical examiner concluded there's a 95% probability based on blood loss and lack of treatment at any county facility. He handed her the report and photos from the crime scene. Seeing the bloody images, Lisa broke down again, crying uncontrollably. "I'll leave you alone for a few minutes to think." "Denying responsibility isn't helping you," Klein said before leaving the room. Detective Nesbitt placed the reports on his desk and shook his head as he passed his superior officer. He headed to the break room for coffee while his commander monitored Lisa through the interrogation room camera. Still reflecting on the case, Nesbitt drove to Blackmore's house, where he found a patrol car already parked outside. He was slightly surprised when Blackmore opened the door quickly. "Yes, officers. How can I help you?" Black asked, noticing the police presence. Detective Nesbitt introduced himself. "I'm Detective Nesbitt. We're investigating the disappearance of Mark Evans. We need you to come to the station for questioning. Mrs. Evans is already there, and we have some questions that require your input." Black, appearing uneasy, asked, "Am I under arrest? I know Mark is missing, but I don't know how I can help. We just have questions that you might help answer. Please come with us." "You're not under arrest," Nesbitt clarified. Too stunned to resist, Black joined them in an unmarked car, sitting in the back as per department protocol. Detective Nesbitt turned to his partner and said, "Let's head to the station." On the way, Nesbitt asked Black, "How well do you know Mrs. Evans?" "She's just Mark's wife to me." "Why are you asking?" Black replied cautiously. "Just curious," Nesbitt said. "What do you do for a living, Mr. Moore?" "I run a landscaping company, Moore Landscaping. We handle a lot of commercial projects, even for the city," Black said, starting to relax a bit. At the station, Black was placed in an interrogation room next to Lisa's. Detective Nesbitt gathered Klein's files and began questioning Moore. Initially, Black denied the affair, but evidence from emails and surveillance reports forced him to confess. He admitted that the affair had lasted nearly 4 months but insisted that neither he nor Lisa had harmed Mark and that they never left the house the night Mark disappeared. As Nesbitt pressed him further, Black proposed a new theory. "If Mark found out about us, he could have flown into a rage, or even hired someone to make it look like we were involved. He and I have a history." Nesbitt countered, "We have the weapon used, a witness who described you in your car, and part of your license plate. Don't try to claim Mark framed you with some elaborate self-destruction scheme." Frustrated, Black replied, "You don't know Mark like I do. We've been best friends since elementary school, but I learned early not to mess with his girlfriends or his wife. In high school, I secretly dated one of his girlfriends. When he found out, he scared me. Even though I was bigger and stronger, he warned me he'd take me down if I did it again." The detective, slightly amused, asked, "So you were afraid of him, but you still had an affair with his wife?" Black sighed. "Resentment built over the years, and a few months ago, I made a move. We've been seeing each other since. I can't believe he found out, we were so careful." The detective reviewed his notes and replied, "Affairs often lead to homicides. I think you and Lisa planned this. You can come clean now or face the maximum penalty, it's your choice." Black insisted, "I didn't hurt Mark. Maybe Lisa did something, but I don't know anything about it." The detective gathered his documents and left the room, saying, "When criminals work together, one always tries to blame the other." "You won't be leaving any time soon." Outside, Nesbitt met his partner, who handed him another report. "The shovels found in the river are from Moore's Landscaping Company. These guys think we won't figure it out." Later, the detectives presented their evidence to the district attorney. Despite the absence of a body, the evidence was strong enough to press charges. Half an hour later, Lisa Evans and Blackmore were charged with the homicide of Mark Evans. Both proclaimed their innocence as their Miranda rights were read. After the hearing, Lisa and Black were booked and photographed. They didn't need to be told not to smile. As they were escorted back to their cells, they spoke for the first time since being charged. "What are we going to do, Black? They can't really believe we did something to Mark, can they?" Lisa asked, still sobbing. "We need our own lawyers, or maybe share one to save money since we're accused of the same thing. But this is wrong." "I think Mark is setting us up," Black said, frustrated. "You can't believe that, can you? Why would Mark go to such extremes?" Lisa asked, shocked. "I don't think you knew Mark as well as you thought. I'm surprised he didn't do something drastic when he found out about us." "If I'd thought he'd find out, I wouldn't have touched you," Black replied, shaking his head. Black then told Lisa about a past incident when he secretly dated one of Mark's girlfriends. Standing near their cell bars, separated by a concrete wall that allowed them to talk easily, Lisa replied, "I don't think Mark would do this. I don't even know how he found out. We were always careful and only met when he was out of town." Tears filled her eyes as she added, "I regret betraying him, even if he isn't dead. I want a divorce," her voice fading with emotion. Black heard her sob and said, "Lisa, stop. You knew the risks when you came to my house. You were aware of the consequences." She fell silent and replied softly, "You're right. I just hope he forgives me." After a pause, Lisa suggested, "Let's call Robert Graham, our lawyer. Maybe he can represent both of us and split the costs." They agreed, and Lisa called an officer to make the request. However, Robert Graham declined due to his involvement in Mark's divorce proceedings. Instead, he recommended his colleague, Basil Smith. Lisa accepted, and Smith was on his way. Black felt relieved upon hearing this and thanked Lisa. They waited in their cells until Smith, an experienced lawyer, arrived. The introductions were brief, and Smith reviewed the charges. "So, you're both accused of Mark Evans' homicide. What did the officers tell you?" "Mrs. Evans, you first, just the key points." Lisa recounted her story, ending in tears. "I had nothing to do with this. I love Mark, I could never hurt him," Lisa said tearfully. Smith then turned to Black. "Your turn." Briefly. Black summarized his experience, stating, "We had nothing to do with Mark's disappearance. I believe Mark orchestrated this to frame us." Sensing the urgency of the situation, Smith said, "We need to focus on getting both of you out of here. It's likely that bail will be set at $100,000. That could be a problem." Lisa, surprised, asked, "I need $100,000 for bail?" "No, just 10%, $10,000 in cash for the bail bond," Smith reassured her. They agreed they could manage the bail and were eager to be released. Smith informed them, "You'll be arraigned tomorrow morning. Bail will be set then, and I'll arrange for your release. Prepare to spend the night here." Both clients reacted poorly to the lawyer's statement. He explained that he couldn't do more until the charges were formally presented. Once they were out, he would speak with the district attorney to request full disclosure of the evidence and better understand their case. They were taken back to their cells, where neither slept well due to the greasy food, a single blanket, and the noise from other inmates. The next morning, at 10 a.m., they met with their lawyer before appearing in court. Despite their disheveled appearance, they entered pleas of not guilty, and bail was set at $100,000. Black, owning a house and a business, quickly negotiated a bail bond for $10,000 and was released early in the afternoon. Lisa was less fortunate. Not being the sole owner of her home and finding her savings account emptied, she had to call her parents for help. After much persuasion, they agreed to provide the $10,000, but the delay meant she spent another night in jail, this time with 2 inebriated women. The following day, after the financial arrangements were settled, Lisa was released. She returned home, subdued and ignoring incoming calls. The next month passed quickly. Lisa learned that Mark had withdrawn the money from their joint account to protect his share before the divorce. She received divorce papers but had no idea what Mark did with the cash. Lisa and Black met with Basil Smith several times. Smith obtained copies of the evidence and planned to meet with the district attorney to argue for dismissing the charges, citing the difficulty of securing a conviction without a body or eyewitness. He suggested hiring a private investigator to explore whether Mark had staged his own disappearance. Black agreed, but Lisa believed Mark had been the victim of a botched robbery. Over the next few weeks, the investigator found no leads. Attempts to identify the tipster who reported the discarded rifle and shovels came up empty, adding to the mystery. Meanwhile, tensions between Lisa and Black grew after their release. Black suggested continuing their affair, but Lisa refused, blaming him for their situation. "I don't want anything to do with you except for a court case," she said, often crying. Black's response was cold. "As you wish, Lisa. You're not the only woman in the city." They only spoke in the company of their lawyer, maintaining their distance otherwise. Their relationship had turned icy. A month after their release, Basil Smith arranged a meeting with the district attorney, Jeff Barton. Lisa and Black hoped the charges would be dismissed. They had avoided calls, relying on caller ID and answering machines, anxious to clear their names and move on. Jeff Barton, surprisingly young and polished, began, "I've just received the final reports from the medical examiner and police. Based on the evidence, I'm offering a reduced sentence of 8 to 12 years for a guilty plea to second-degree homicide." Lisa and Black were stunned, loudly proclaiming their innocence. Their lawyer, trying to calm them, asked how Barton justified the offer. Barton explained, "We have new evidence. Blood DNA on the license plate and trunk lining of your car matches Mark Evans. Additionally, black polyethylene found under Mark's car matches materials used by your landscaping business." Lisa angrily accused Black, "What have you done?" Black snapped back, "You know I had nothing to do with this. You were with me when it happened." Basil Smith intervened, calming both. He turned to Barton. "Excuse my clients. We expected the charges to be dismissed, and this statement has caught us off guard." Barton, amused, replied, "I understand, but we have enough evidence to go to trial. The medical examiner's report confirms the victim lost too much blood to survive. The crime scene suggests the body was dragged and loaded into a car. The prosecution is confident." Barton handed over the reports and left. Lisa and Black spoke urgently with Smith, who advised them to remain silent. "I know you're shocked. Don't turn on each other. We need to build a defense. Do you want to reject the plea deal?" Both rejected the offer, convinced they wouldn't be convicted. Smith agreed to prepare for trial. After they left, Smith reviewed the reports, questioning whether his clients were truthful. Despite his doubts, he remained committed to defending them. Months later, the trial began. Judge Robert Cox took his seat at 10 a.m. on a Monday. Basil Smith sat between Lisa and Black, trying to manage their tension. He had considered suggesting separate lawyers but knew they couldn't afford it. District Attorney Jeff Barton began his opening statement directly. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we don't have the body of Mark Evans, but we intend to prove he is dead and that the defendants are guilty of his homicide." He revealed that the defendants had an affair, which Mark Evans discovered, leading him to file for divorce. While we can't determine exactly how and when Mark found out, traces on his computer show he was aware of their affair. Emails documented his efforts to track them, his financial preparations for divorce, and his intention to confront them. The evidence suggests this confrontation occurred at Mr. Moore's residence, where Mr. Evans was incapacitated, placed in the passenger seat of a car, and driven to George Washington Park. There, he was shot in the upper chest while likely unconscious, dragged out of the car, and shot again, this time severing his carotid artery. Graphic photos were displayed, showing Mark's final moments. At this point, Lisa Evans lost her composure, requiring the judge's intervention to restore order. Barton continued, "After the second shot, Mr. Evans was wrapped in plastic, dragged from the site, and loaded into Mr. Moore's trunk. He was taken to an unknown location and buried. The murder weapon and shovels were discarded in the river, but a concerned citizen reported them, leading police to recover the items. Forensic analysis confirmed the presence of the defendants at the crime scene. Mark Evans' blood was found in Blackmore's car and on Lisa Evans' shoes. District Attorney Barton concluded his statement. Basil Smith countered, emphasizing the presumption of innocence and urging the jury to focus on the evidence. Despite his efforts, the prosecution's statement left a strong impression. The first witness, an IT expert, testified about the emails and maps Mark Evans used to track his wife's meetings with Mr. Moore. The tracking device described in Mark's letter precisely logged locations and times. This evidence humiliated Lisa Evans, while Blackmore appeared uninterested. Smith's cross-examination yielded little since the tracking device and emails were indisputable. Reporters eagerly noted the details of the tracking device, anticipating reader interest. After a long lunch break, the trial resumed with testimony from the emergency operator and two responding officers. They provided basic, undramatic facts about the discovery of Mark Evans' car. The intensity of the trial escalated when detectives and forensic experts described the crime scene, supported by large, graphic photographs showing bullet holes, blood, and drag marks. The medical examiner detailed the blood loss, estimating it at 3 to 4 pints, and described the blood spray patterns indicating a severed artery. The examiner concluded that Mark Evans was dying when Lisa Evans lost control and shouted, "No, Mark can't be dead." Her outburst forced the judge to suspend the trial until the following morning. The second day began with the medical expert continuing his testimony, focusing on blood sample analysis. After 15 minutes, District Attorney Barton completed his questioning, passing the witness to defense attorney Basil Smith. Smith ensured Lisa Evans, now sedated, remained calm. He aimed to refute the graphic depiction of the shooting. Smith asked, "You estimated that Mark Evans lost 3 to 4 pints of blood, but isn't it possible it was only 1 or 2 pints, depending on how the blood pooled?" The medical examiner responded, "It's unlikely but not impossible." Smith pressed further. "Could first aid have mitigated the fatality of Mark Evans' injury?" The examiner replied, "Unlikely but not impossible. Immediate medical attention would have been required." Smith highlighted the lack of evidence for immediate assistance and dismissed the witness after securing minor concessions. Next, a forensic expert specializing in ballistics testified about 2 recovered bullets. One bullet from the car seat was deformed, while the other, found in the firewood, was intact and matched the recovered weapon. Smith asked, "Were the bullets examined for bone or tissue fragments?" The technician confirmed that only minimal blood traces were found, explaining that the bullets likely wiped clean as they passed through upholstery and fabric. He noted that the bullets were full metal jacket rounds, commonly used in military applications, with a stronger gilding metal jacket around the core compared to standard copper jackets. This was a double-edged point for the defense. While there was no evidence that the bullets passed through the body, their characteristics and circumstances supported the prosecution's case. Efforts to trace the weapon were futile, as it had been sold at a gun show 20 years prior without purchase records. Smith confirmed that no fingerprints or DNA from the defendants were found on the weapon or shell casings. Anything not washed away by the river water was wiped clean before disposal, the technician stated. Another expert discussed the shovels found at the scene. Although there were no fingerprints or DNA, the shovels bore the branding of Moore's Landscaping. 14 identical shovels were found at Moore's business. Cross-examination provided no new information. Witnesses from the Forensic Science Department and police testified throughout the morning and afternoon. Smith's most effective cross-examination came with a technician who admitted that the blood found in Blackmore's car could have been planted by a third party, granting the defense a small victory. However, things became more complicated when the technician testified that blood was found in Lisa Evans' car and on her right shoe. The technician admitted they could not determine whether the blood transferred from the shoe to the gas pedal or vice versa. Smith hoped this uncertainty would benefit Lisa. As the prosecution rested, the third morning began with the defense presenting its case. Local newspapers speculated that the defense faced an uphill battle against the prosecution's evidence. Without a body, securing a conviction would be challenging, especially since the defense strategy was to create doubt about whether Mark Evans was truly dead. Basil Smith's first defense witness was Dr. Wilbur, a blood analysis expert. Wilbur testified that the blood evidence collection could have been handled better. He argued that a proper analysis of the blood-soaked ground could have provided a more accurate estimate of blood loss. He suggested that as little as 1.5 pints of blood might have created the scene and that someone losing that amount could still be alive. The district attorney chose not to cross-examine. Smith called Blackmore to the stand. Black denied owning a weapon and suggested the shovels found at the scene might have been stolen from his work sites. Smith kept the testimony brief and handed Black over for cross-examination. District Attorney Barton asked, "Why do you believe Mark Evans would stage his own murder?" Black recounted how Mark had threatened him in high school after Black secretly dated Mark's girlfriend. Barton pressed, "So, this isn't the first time you interfered in Mark Evans' relationships. Don't you think that if Mark wanted to destroy someone, he would have chosen you?" Black struggled to respond directly, muttering that his physical advantage over Mark would have prevented a confrontation. "So, you think you could intimidate your friend into taking his own life? Is that why you felt comfortable taking his wife?" The prosecutor asked pointedly before continuing without waiting for a response. "Your actions show you're a narcissist who thinks he can take any woman and disregard friendship." Smith objected, arguing that the prosecutor was testifying instead of asking questions. The judge sustained the objection and instructed the jury to disregard the prosecutor's last statement. Black, visibly shaken, left the stand without further comment. Realizing Black's testimony had failed, Basil Smith hoped Lisa's testimony might help. Lisa, more composed, firmly stated that she was not involved in any attack on her husband and suggested that he might have been the victim of a crime. Basil chose not to ask further questions. The prosecutor then questioned Lisa, "Where were you between midnight on Saturday and 2 p.m. on Sunday?" Lisa, embarrassed, answered, "I was with Blackmore at his house from 8 p.m. Saturday until about 1:30 p.m. Sunday." "You're not really answering the question. Tell us exactly what you were doing between midnight and 2 a.m., the prosecutor pressed. Lisa, confused, said, "I was in Black's room at midnight. We were, being intimate." "And how long did this last?" The prosecutor continued. "Probably until after 1 a.m., Lisa admitted, blushing. "So then what?" he asked. "We slept until about 5:45 a.m., she said. "Was Mr. Moore in bed when you woke up?" "Yes, he was there. We were, intimate again and went back to sleep around 6:30. Then we woke up at 11 a.m., Lisa replied quickly. "So, you initiated intimacy again at 6:30? The prosecutor clarified. Lisa, embarrassed, responded, "No, he was already ready." The prosecutor, sensing the jury's reaction, pressed further. "Tell us exactly how you woke him up." Lisa, resigned, said, "I just started being intimate with him." The prosecutor delivered the final blow. "You say you love your husband, is that true?" Lisa nodded, visibly emotional. The prosecutor continued, "Yet, you spent the night with his best friend while he was possibly taking his own life. How can we believe you weren't involved in his death?" Lisa cried silently, unable to respond. Judge Cox ended her ordeal by asking if there were any further questions. When none were raised, the judge announced a recess for lunch. After regaining composure, Lisa met with her lawyer, Basil Smith, for a somber lunch. The experienced attorney warned her that the case could go either way. Privately, he felt pessimistic, as both clients had faltered on the stand. The afternoon session ended quickly, with Smith announcing that there were no further defense witnesses. Both attorneys prepared their closing arguments. The prosecutor emphasized the overwhelming evidence against the defendants, while the defense highlighted the circumstantial nature of the case, the absence of a body, and the lack of a clear motive. The case was handed to the jury at 4 p.m., and deliberations lasted for 2.5 hours before they adjourned for the night. The next morning, Lisa and Black waited in Basil Smith's office, sharing a conference room despite their differences, hoping for an acquittal. At 3:30 p.m., the call came. The jury had reached a verdict. Lisa's parents, who had come to town for the trial, joined them in court. The verdict was announced quickly: guilty of second-degree murder. Lisa broke into tears, and Black slammed his fist in frustration. They were handcuffed and taken into custody, with Lisa having a brief moment to proclaim her innocence to her parents. The week between the conviction and sentencing passed slowly. Lisa's parents visited her daily, while Black received a visit from a cousin. At sentencing, both were given 15 years to life. Basil Smith promised to review court records for a possible appeal. Within 3 days, they were transferred to state prisons. Lisa's facility had a good reputation, but Black's had a history of riots. With the trial over, media coverage faded, and Lisa Evans and Blackmore disappeared from public attention. A few months later, Basil Smith and Jeff Barden met for a drink, reflecting on the case. Smith expressed surprise at the convictions, believing the consistent stories of the defendants suggested innocence. Barden replied, "The jury didn't believe them. I try not to take these cases personally unless they involve particularly heinous crimes or children. This case wasn't the worst, but the defendants didn't inspire much sympathy." A year later, news broke of a major riot in Blackmore's prison. Black had been stabbed during the unrest and was transferred to a hospital with a collapsed lung. He was in critical condition but expected to survive. 18 months after Lisa Evans and Blackmore were convicted of Mark Evans' murder, Basil Smith rarely thought about the case. He had spent the first year reviewing transcripts but found no legal grounds for an appeal. One quiet Wednesday morning, the receptionist at the New York office of the Innocence Project received a FedEx package. Inside was a DVD, a sealed bag, and a multi-page letter. Intrigued, she called Tony Kelly, a young lawyer, to examine it. Tony, casually dressed, took the package to his office. Having worked at the Innocence Project for a year doing legal research, he enjoyed helping those wrongfully convicted. Sitting at his desk, he read the letter. The letter, addressed to the Innocence Project, began, "Regarding the convictions of Lisa Evans and Blackmore, I don't know where to start, so I'll begin at the beginning. My name isn't important, but the information I have could change the lives of these 2 defendants and 5 others, including me. About 15 months ago, a man responded to my ad seeking someone with IT skills. He knew as much, if not more, about network systems as I did, so I hired him immediately. This man, whom I'll call Mark, was quiet but exceptionally skilled. In 2 months, my business grew 50% thanks to his efforts and long hours. When Mark started working for me, he had just arrived in town and hadn't yet rented a place. My business was new, so I rented him our basement room to generate extra income, which I wanted to reinvest in the business to support myself and my young son. Although it was a risk, something about Mark convinced me he wasn't a threat. Soon, we settled into a routine. For the first 3 months, he lived in the basement, but we had dinner together and often commuted to work. He frequently worked late hours, preferring productivity over TV or sleep. Over time, our relationship evolved, from employer and employee to friends, and eventually, to a loving family. My son now calls him Dad. From the start, I sensed something deeply troubling Mark. One quiet afternoon, I closed the office door and called him in, determined to find out what was bothering him. He finally confessed he was fleeing a failed marriage. His wife had betrayed him with a close friend, and he had come close to committing murder-suicide because of it. Our conversation helped him move past his pain. We began dating on weekends, maintaining professional boundaries during the week. After a month, he moved out of the basement into my room, and we became a family. Still, I felt he was hiding something. Mark had become a loving father figure. 4 days ago, Mark collapsed at work and was diagnosed with a heart condition requiring surgery. Once stabilized, he was moved to a private room, where he shared his story, fearing he might die and that his secret would die with him if he didn't survive the surgery. Over the course of a day, he confided everything to me. Once I agreed to share his story with you, he seemed relieved. Now, as he sleeps, I am writing this letter with our son asleep beside him. I need to finish it tonight, create a DVD, and send everything by midday tomorrow, ensuring it can't be traced back to us. Mark's story began almost 2 years ago. He had been happily married to Lisa for nearly 6 years when he noticed a small bruise on her right breast. Initially, he thought it was from bumping into furniture, but it looked more like a love bite. Knowing it wasn't from him, he spent the night agonizing over how it could have happened. These thoughts stayed with him the next day at work. By the time he arrived at the office, he felt foolish for his suspicions. He had no evidence of wrongdoing and thought it might be circumstantial. Just before lunch, a delivery manager brought him a tracking device to evaluate for improving delivery services. Mark quickly decided how to test it. 3 days after installing the device in his wife's car, he checked the monitor while at work. Lisa had said she was going shopping, but the tracker showed she had gone to Blackmore's house. An hour later, her car was still there. Feeling suspicious, he called her, and when she claimed to be shopping, he knew something was wrong. That night, he listened to her fabricated story about her shopping trip, feeling sick but choosing not to confront her immediately. Instead, he observed her over the next week. While he was away on a business trip, the tracker showed her car traveling across 3 states to Black's house, where it stayed from 8 p.m. to 2 a.m. She lied, saying she had been home all night. This confirmation of her infidelity devastated him. When he returned, he considered drastic action. He knew Black was a womanizer but never thought he'd pursue Lisa. Her betrayal broke his heart. That night, Mark visited an elderly widow next door under the pretense of borrowing a tool. He retrieved a revolver hidden in her late husband's toolbox. Mark intended to use it to kill Black and Lisa, then himself. He decided to wait until he could catch them together. He ordered his own tracking device to replace the one he was evaluating. Fortunately, Lisa and Black didn't meet for another week, giving Mark time to rethink his plan. During that time, he devised a better one, framing them for murder. He spent a week planning and gathering supplies. Once ready, he claimed to be leaving for a weekend business trip, knowing they would meet in his absence. When Lisa went to Black's house, he put his plan into action, creating a paper trail suggesting he was divorcing her. Before leaving, he fired a bullet into the passenger seat of his car and another into a block of wood, muffling the shots with a blanket in the garage. This step was a strange relief, marking the beginning of his revenge. Mark drove his car to a secluded spot near Black's house and set up the scene. He had a large gym bag containing everything he needed for his plan. He laid out firewood, plastic, and a spare tire, creating drag marks toward the paved road. Then, he put the tire back in the trunk and scattered the firewood around. Using a needle, Mark drew almost 2 pints of blood from his hand, diluted it with distilled water, and sprayed it to simulate arterial spray patterns. He smeared blood on the car seat and the ground to suggest significant blood loss. After finishing, he packed everything back into his gym bag and left the park, reaching an old car he had bought specifically for this purpose. Dizzy from blood loss, he rested until almost 6 a.m., then drove to Black's house to complete his plan. Lisa's car was still at Black's house and unlocked. Mark placed a few drops of blood on the gas pedal and smeared some inside Black's car. He panicked when he saw a light on in Black's house and quickly left. From a payphone, he used a voice changer to report his car abandoned in the park, pretending to be a woman. He then discarded 2 shovels and the revolver in the river. Exhausted, Mark stayed in a motel for 2 days, taking supplements and eating energy bars. He made another call using the voice changer, this time as an elderly man, helping the police find the revolver. Mark told me this entire story because he wants to leave his past as Mark Evans behind. He now lives under a new identity that only my son and I know and wishes to maintain. Mark asked me to send this information to help exonerate Lisa Evans and Blackmore. Tomorrow, I will collect a copy of the New York Times and use part of the first page to place all of Mark's fingerprints in a blood stain, proving that the DNA matches the blood found at the park. This should be enough to free them from prison. At the end of the letter was a handwritten note. Mark came out of surgery in good condition. He wants me to fly to Seattle tomorrow to send this package. I hate leaving him, but it will ease his mind. We're expecting twins in about 3 months. Tony Kelly read the last page and checked for additional notes, but it was blank. He set aside the letter and examined the other items in the package. The DVD was labeled photos taken at George Washington Park, and the sealed black envelope was marked fingerprints and DNA. Tony reviewed the printed pages again, then called a senior lawyer. This case was beyond his capacity to handle alone. It didn't take long to confirm that the DNA belonged to Mark Evans and that the fingerprints matched those on his car found at the park. This provided undeniable evidence that 2 people were convicted for a murder that never occurred. The state attorney general and governor expedited their release. A week later, Lisa Evans and Blackmore returned to court with Basil Smith, Lisa's parents, and even District Attorney Jeff Barden, along with state representatives. The state attorney general apologized for the wrongful convictions, blamed Mark Evans for deceiving the justice system, and announced efforts to locate him to hold him accountable for financial costs. When asked where they would begin searching for Mark, he could only shrug. Blackmore appeared changed, no longer arrogant but more willing to compromise. He apologized to Lisa for the events that led to their incarceration. Lisa appeared indifferent, only wanting to leave with her parents. Both Basil Smith and the district attorney apologized, acknowledging they had been misled by Mark Evans and promised to be more diligent in future cases. While the state was not found liable, Lisa and Black each received $50,000 as compensation. Black, whose business had gone bankrupt and whose house was sold to cover legal fees, left the city, telling Lisa that the check was merely a fraction of what he had lost. Lisa, visibly worn down by her ordeal, simply said they deserved it and left without saying goodbye. 2 weeks after cable news reported their release, a large envelope arrived at Basil Smith's office. Inside was a note for the lawyer and a sealed envelope for Lisa. Basil delivered the letter to Lisa at her apartment. After a brief conversation, she opened the envelope, recognizing Mark's handwriting. The letter read, "Lisa, I'm sorry for the time you spent in prison. Your betrayal with Black nearly drove me insane. My new life and happiness have shown me that freeing both of you was necessary for my own peace. I know the authorities will look for me, but I trust in my new life with my family. Good luck and goodbye. Mark." The letter slipped from Lisa's hands, destroying any lingering hope of reconciliation with Mark.